The sky burned red as the last barricades shook under enemy fire. Kale Vayner stood at the center of the crumbling defense line, armor scorched and chest heaving, his hand tightening on the haft of his plasma glaive. The weapon hummed weakly, its core nearly exhausted, a reflection of the army he commanded, exhausted, blooded, and cornered. All around him the ruins of Veyrune's capital city stretched in jagged lines of broken towers, streets scarred with craters, and air thick with smoke and static. He surveyed the battlefield with the gaze of a man who had seen too many defeats. The enemy had surrounded them in perfect formation, their war machines closing the ring with cold precision. Once proud soldiers of his kind now crouched behind fractured stone, eyes hollow yet still glinting with defiance. Kale knew the truth, they had hours left at most. Perhaps less. Yet he would not let his warriors die like cattle. A shout tore across the front as Lieutenant Drosk surged forward to intercept a breach. Towering and broad-shouldered, Drosk had carried the honor of wielding the spear known as Skyfang for a decade, a weapon as much a symbol as it was a blade. Sparks cascaded when it clashed against enemy plating, each striker defiant him against despair. But as Kale watched, a blast from an enemy cannon struck true, the ancient weapon shattering into shards that clattered across the stone. The lieutenant staggered, gripping the broken staff in stunned silence. The sight sent a tremor through the line. Soldiers who had fought through fire and blood gasped, their morale cracking as surely as the weapon had. The spear had been a relic of countless victories, and now its destruction marked the cruel finality of their struggle. Drosk roared in fury, swinging the jagged remains in blind defiance, but Kale knew the sound for what it was, the howl of inevitability. Kale stepped forward, voice carrying over the thunder of artillery. "Hold your ground." His words cut through the din, iron-willed though the shadows of fatigue weighed them. "Let them find no fear here. If this is to be our end, let it be sung as the day we chose fire instead of chains." His soldiers straightened, some raising their weapons higher, others pressing wounded shoulders against the barricades. Kale's heart clenched with pride and sorrow. They were ready to die, not because they believed survival possible, but because they trusted him. That trust was both a gift and a burden heavier than the armor on his chest. The encirclement tightened. Columns of enemy machines advanced with mechanical patience, their crimson optics cutting through the smoke like baleful stars. The ground quaked beneath their march, and the sky above rumbled with bombardments that never ceased. Kale could already map their deaths in his mind, the barricades collapsing, the line splintering, his warriors dragged into a tide of steel and fire. He whispered a silent oath to the ancestors that he would not fall kneeling. A blast rocked the earth, throwing him to one knee. Dust and flame washed over the barricade as soldiers cried out. He forced himself upright, lifting his glaive in defiance. Drosk, his face smeared with ash, stood beside him, gripping the useless spear fragment as though it were still whole. "Commander," he growled, voice raw, "give the order. Let us charge and tear the teeth from them." Kale's gaze swept over the ring of advancing machines, their numbers blotting out hope. A charge would be glorious, yes, but meaningless. "Not yet," he said, though even he did not know what he waited for. Perhaps for courage to wither, or for the enemy to deal the final blow. Perhaps for a miracle, though he had ceased to believe in them long ago. Then the heavens tore open. A streak of light carved through the thick clouds, a blazing shape that roared as it cut across the smoke-choked sky. At first Kale thought it a missile, some cruel weapon launched to hammer the final nail into their grave. But the object did not arc downward in the calculated descent of ordnance. It fell wild, defiant, a comet cast from the stars themselves. It slammed into the earth beyond the barricades with a force that shook the bones of every soldier present. A cloud of dust and debris billowed outward, swallowing the nearest ranks of enemy machines. The ground cracked, and for a heartbeat all was still, silent, save for the faint groan of shifting stone. Kale's warriors stared wide-eyed, gripping their weapons, uncertain if death had come or salvation. He felt his own breath catch, his mind scrambling to frame what his eyes beheld as the dust began to settle. From the crater rose a figure. Tall by his kind's measure, yet strange in proportion, broad of chest, lean of limb, his armor scorched from entry but unbroken. The helm split open with a hiss, revealing a face unlike any Kale had seen in decades of war. The features were harsh, angular, the eyes alight with a fire and tempered by despair. Human. Kale's pulse stumbled. Humans were spoken of in whispers, ghosts of a species long removed from the great struggles of the galaxy, thought scattered or extinguished. To see one standing alive, walking from fire as though it were nothing, this defied all reason. The stranger brushed dust from his shoulder, as though descending from the heavens into a battlefield was no more troublesome than stepping off a transport. His gaze swept over the ruined barricade, the weary soldiers, the tightening enemy ring. A faint grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Mind if I join the fight?" he asked. The words hung in the smoke, improbable and absurd, yet carrying the weight of something Kale could not name. A ripple passed through his warriors, disbelief mingling with a spark they had nearly forgotten. For the first time in days, perhaps years, Kale felt the iron clasp of inevitability loosen on his chest. The machines advanced still, relentless and certain. Yet for reasons Kale could not explain, he no longer saw only death in their march. Something had shifted. And though he could not name it, he knew with a soldier's instinct that nothing on this battlefield would ever be the same again. The human stood in the crater, his figure outlined by drifting ash and the glow of molten stone. For a moment Kale thought the stranger might be some vision summoned by exhaustion, but the weight in his eyes and the ease with which he carried himself dispelled that illusion. The battlefield stilled, warriors on both sides hesitating, as though the arrival of one man had broken the rhythm of war. Kale raised his glaive in a cautious salute. "You carry no banner. Who are you?" The human's grin widened. "Name's Marcus Hale. Former Terran Marine." His voice rolled with confidence, not arrogance, and though Kale had never heard the accent of a human before, the words carried an edge honed by years of battle. Marcus glanced at the ruined barricade, then at the encircling machines. "Looks like you're about to be erased. Shame. You've still got teeth." Drosk snarled, lifting the broken spear fragment. "Another vulture come to scavenge our corpses? We need no outsider to mock us." Marcus tilted his head, unimpressed by the lieutenant's fury. "If I wanted corpses, I'd be standing with the machines. But I'm not. I came because I can't stand watching a good fight go to waste." The commander weighed the man's words. He saw no deceit in Marcus's expression, only a grim determination that mirrored his own. "Very well," Kale said, his voice low but steady. "If you mean to fight, then prove it. Stand with us." The enemy machines surged forward, seizing on the momentary lull. Metallic limbs clattered across shattered stone, weapons charging with a hiss of energy. Kale braced himself, ready to sell his life dearly, but Marcus moved first. He leapt from the crater with startling agility, landing on the front line before the machines struck. His armor, scarred but functional, whirred with hidden mechanisms that adjusted to each motion. In his hands he carried no weapon of elegance or heritage, only a rugged rifle strapped to his back and a combat blade at his hip. Yet when he raised the rifle, it spoke with a thunder unlike any Kale had heard. Explosive rounds tore into the advancing ranks, shredding steel shells as though they were paper. The alien soldiers stared, astonished. Kale had seen entire platoons fail to halt such a charge, but Marcus alone had staggered the enemy's front. When the rifle's magazine clicked empty, he discarded it without hesitation and drew the blade, charging straight into the machines. What followed defied every principle Kale's people had ever taught. Where his warriors fought with precision and form, Marcus fought with sheer audacity. He vaulted atop one machine, driving the blade into its optic core, then ripped the weapon free in a spray of sparks. Another lunged, and he ducked beneath its strike, shoving a grenade into the exposed joint before rolling clear. The blast flung shrapnel and fire across the barricade, scattering foes and friend alike. Drosk blinked, stunned. He fights like a madman. Kale's grip tightened on his glaive. No. He fights like someone who refuses to die. Encouraged, the alien soldiers rallied around Marcus's chaos. They surged from cover, striking at disoriented enemies, cutting them down before they could recover formation. Kale himself joined the push, glaive slicing arcs of plasma through steel, each motion steadied by the human's reckless advance. For the first time in days, the machines fell back a step. When the dust cleared, twisted wreckage littered the ground, and silence settled over the barricade. The soldiers panted, their armor dripping with soot, but their eyes were alive again. They had tasted something they had forgotten: momentum. Marcus pulled his blade free from a smoking husk and glanced over his shoulder. Not bad. You lot just needed a shove. Drosk spat into the dust, though his expression carried less scorn than before. You gamble with death as if it were a game. Yet you live. Marcus gave him a shrug. Death only wins when you stop swinging. I don't stop. Cale approached, his eyes fixed on the human. Why are you here? Humanity withdrew from the wars generations ago. We heard you vanished into the void. The human's face hardened, his grin fading into a shadow of old bitterness. We didn't vanish. We were erased from your records because it was easier to forget us. The Terran Confederacy collapsed under its own weight, and the survivors scattered. Some of us kept fighting. Some of us didn't. Me. He adjusted the strap of his ruined rifle. I never learned how to quit. The commander studied him, the words resonating with a truth that settled deep in his bones. Then you came here by choice. Marcus's eyes flicked toward the encircling machines, still regrouping in the distance. I came because those things don't stop until every free being is ground beneath them. And I can't stand bullies. His tone carried no bravado, only a simple fact. Cale found himself nodding. He had lived long enough to know conviction when he saw it. Then you will not stand alone. The respite ended as another wave of machines advanced, their coordination tighter, their weapons brighter. The enemy had recognized the danger of the human and meant to crush him swiftly. Marcus wiped grime from his brow and cracked his neck, the faint grin returning. Good. I was starting to worry they'd lost their nerve. The battle reignited with renewed ferocity. Side by side, alien warriors and human soldier struck with a rhythm born not of training but of shared desperation. Marcus's reckless adaptability meshed with Cale's disciplined precision, each filling the other's gaps. Drosk, though skeptical, fought shoulder to shoulder with the human, his broken spear fragment wielded with lethal intent. The machines pressed hard, but every advance was met with resistance fiercer than before. Marcus taught them to strike where joints were weakest, to use fallen wrecks as cover, to fight not with honor but with survival. Techniques once unthinkable became lifelines. Cale saw his soldiers' eyes change, not only with respect for the human, but with the dawning realization that victory was not beyond imagination. When at last the enemy faltered, Marcus seized the moment. He rallied the warriors, driving straight into the weakest point of the encirclement. Cale followed without hesitation, his heart pounding with a vigor he had thought long buried. Through fire and steel they cut, Marcus at the spearpoint, carving a path where none should exist. The breach opened. For the first time since the siege began, the enemy ring wavered. Cale's soldiers poured through, dragging their wounded, shouting in disbelief at the impossible escape. Behind them, wreckage burned, the machines momentarily scattered. At the edge of the ruins, Cale turned to see Marcus standing tall amidst the smoke, chest heaving, eyes bright with unyielding fire. The man had given them more than survival, he had given them defiance. Cale's voice carried across the battered company. Remember this day. Not for the spear that shattered, but for the warrior who fell from the sky. Marcus wiped grime from his hands and gave a weary nod. Don't thank me yet. This was just the first round. The soldiers murmured, some exchanging glances, others gripping their weapons tighter. They had broken the circle, but the enemy would return stronger. Cale felt the weight of it, but he also felt something else stirring within him, something he had nearly forgotten. Hope. Would you like me to continue building Section 3 in the same tone, or do you want to refine Marcus's personality further before I expand? You said. The survivors moved through the ruins like ghosts, their steps uneven, their eyes restless as they carried the wounded deeper into the city's underground. Smoke drifted through collapsed arches, and every corner smelled of scorched stone and blood. Cale led them down the half-buried stairways toward a cavernous chamber that once belonged to the city's waterworks. It had become their refuge, a hollow shielded by earth and shadow, where the enemy's scanners could not easily reach. The chamber echoed with the sound of labored breaths and the clatter of weapons dropped in exhaustion. Soldiers slumped against walls, some still clutching their blades as though letting go would invite death to finish what the battle had not. Kale stood at the center, his armor dark with soot, and looked over the company. They were fewer now, barely a fraction of the force that had marched out at the war's beginning. Yet their eyes carried a spark that had not been there before. He knew whose presence had rekindled it. Marcus Hale sat on a fragment of broken piping, running a whetstone along the edge of his combat knife. The human's movements were calm, almost casual, but his gaze scanned the chamber as if measuring every soldier, every exit, every potential ambush. He seemed incapable of stillness. Drosk, leaning against a column with the broken shaft of his spear at his side, watched him with open suspicion. Kale stepped forward. "You fought well." His words carried more than politeness. They carried recognition. Marcus looked up, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. "So did your people. They just needed someone to remind them they're not dead yet." Drosk's jaw tightened. "They are not your people." The human slid the whetstone back into his kit. "They were close enough when the machines were trying to gut me. That makes us brothers for the moment." Kale raised a hand before Drosk could retort. Conflict among his soldiers now would tear apart the fragile thread holding them together. He turned to Marcus. "You know these machines. You've fought them before." "How?" Marcus's expression shifted, hardening like steel under a forge. "They crushed colonies when I was young. I watched entire settlements erased, not because they held strategic value, but because the machines wanted to send a message: resistance is futile. I swore then I'd never let them make good on that threat again." Silence settled over the chamber. The alien soldiers studied him with renewed interest. They had all suffered under the enemy's relentless campaigns, yet to hear such words from a human, a being they had thought extinct, was like listening to history refuse to stay buried. Kale nodded slowly. "If you would fight with us, then teach us. We cannot survive by our traditions alone. You showed us that on the field." Marcus stood and moved to the center of the chamber. He picked up a shard of twisted metal from the floor and jabbed it into the dust, sketching rough lines to form a map. "The machines don't tire, don't hesitate. They count on you fighting with honor, with form, with predictable patterns. Stop giving them what they expect. Strike their joints, their sensors, their supply lines. Use the ruins. Use the shadows. Turn their strength into a weakness." Some of the warriors frowned, murmuring at the thought of abandoning their traditions, but Kale silenced them with a glance. He saw the truth in Marcus's words. Survival required more than courage. It required adaptation. Over the next days, the chamber became a crucible. Marcus drilled the soldiers with merciless precision, showing them how to fight without rhythm, how to break an enemy's advance not with walls of honor but with chaos. He showed them how to rig traps with scrap metal, how to hurl explosives to scatter formations, how to move as smaller packs instead of rigid phalanxes. Drosk resisted at first, growling that it was cowardice, but Marcus faced him directly. "You think it's dishonor?" Marcus asked, stepping close until their foreheads nearly touched. "I think it's survival. The machines don't care about your codes. They'll grind them into dust. What matters is that you live to fight tomorrow." Drosk's glare burned with fury, yet beneath it lay a glimmer of reluctant respect. He had seen the human carve through steel with bare determination. Even broken weapons in his hands became deadly. Slowly, grudgingly, Drosk began to follow his lead. Kale watched the transformation unfold. His soldiers learned faster than he expected. At night, they laughed quietly around dim lights, something they had not done in months. Even wounded men found themselves speaking again, their despair dulled by the presence of the one who fought without fear. Kale wondered what kept Marcus moving forward, what emptiness or fire burned inside him to make him so relentless. Their respite did not last. Scouts returned one evening with grim news. The enemy was adapting. Heavier units had joined the search, their patrols sweeping wider, their formations tighter. Kale gathered the company, their shadows long against the chamber walls, as the scouts described the coming storm. The machines had learned. Marcus leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "They're scared. That's why they're changing tactics. But scared enemies are dangerous. They'll throw everything they have at wiping you out before you spread what you've learned. Drosk spat on the ground. So you admit you've brought their wrath down upon us? The human met his gaze without flinching. I admit I gave you a chance. They would have slaughtered you either way. Now, at least, you can make them bleed. The chamber stirred with unease, but Kale cut through it. Enough. This fight is no longer about survival alone. If the enemy adapts, we strike before they finish their preparations. Their command core lies at the heart of the encampment. Destroy it, and their advance falters. The soldiers shifted, murmurs of disbelief mixing with murmurs of resolve. A strike against the command core was madness, a task that would claim countless lives. Yet as Kale looked at Marcus, he found certainty settling in his chest. This human had already defied the impossible once. Perhaps he could again. Marcus pushed away from the wall. A direct assault will get you killed. But if you want that core gone, I'll show you how. Hit them where they least expect, tear out their heart, and keep moving before they know what happened. That's the only way. Kale met his gaze. Then you will lead us. For a heartbeat, Marcus said nothing, the weight of the responsibility clear in his eyes. Then the faint grin returned, the same reckless glint Kale had first seen in the crater. Fine. But don't blame me if you start winning. Laughter rippled through the chamber, rough and strained but real. It echoed against the stone like a promise, a reminder that despair was no longer the only song they knew. Kale felt it settle in his bones. They were no longer waiting to die. They were preparing to strike. Above them, the enemy marched, relentless as ever. But in the shadows below, something new had taken root, an alliance forged not by history or blood, but by fire. And as Kale studied the human sharpening his blade once more, he could not help but wonder how far this fire would carry them. The march toward the enemy encampment began under a sky smothered with smoke. Kale moved at the head of the column, his glaive balanced in his grip, every step measured against the silence of his men. The ruins seemed to lean inward as if to warn them back, their blackened towers like bones of some giant long dead. Behind him came Marcus, rifle repaired from scavenged parts, knife strapped to his thigh, eyes alert with a readiness that bordered on hunger. He carried himself as if the battlefield were home, as if every ruin whispered a familiar language only he could understand. The soldiers advanced in tight packs, moving through shadows as Marcus had taught them. They placed traps in their wake, scattering broken metal laced with charges to harry any pursuit. Drosk, though still skeptical, kept close to the human's flank, watching him with a mixture of mistrust and grudging admiration. The lieutenant had begun to mimic Marcus's brutal efficiency, wielding his broken spear like a short staff, striking quick and cruel instead of relying on long, sweeping arcs. When the outer patrols appeared, Marcus halted the column with a clenched fist. His voice was low but steady. We take them quietly. Fast. No alarms. He slipped into the shadows before Kale could nod, his blade whispering through the joints of the first machine. It toppled in silence, a husk that barely had time to twitch. The aliens followed, striking as predators instead of soldiers, dismantling the patrol in moments. Not a sound escaped. Kale felt a shiver move through him as he realized how quickly they had adapted. Weeks ago his warriors would have charged with ceremony, announcing their presence. Now they vanished into shadows, emerging only to kill. He wondered what price they paid for this transformation, yet he could not deny the strength it gave them. The enemy encampment soon rose before them, a fortress of black alloy bristling with weapons and humming with power. At its core loomed the command nexus, a monolith crowned with pulsating lights, the brain of the invasion. Around it swarmed legions of machines, precise as clockwork, relentless as tide. To strike it directly was folly. To retreat was death. Marcus studied the formation, his eyes narrowing. We cut straight through. Hit them harder than they expect, faster than they can calculate. They think you're prey. Show them they're wrong. Kale looked to his men. Their faces were pale, their armor cracked, but their eyes burned with the same fire he had seen when Marcus first fell from the sky. They no longer waited for death. They thirsted for the fight. He raised his glaive high. This is the day we end their march. With me. The strike began in a storm of fire. Marcus fired his rifle into the densest cluster, grenades flaring like suns, tearing gaps in the ranks. Kale led the charge through the breach, his glaive a lance of light carving molten trails into steel. Drosk roared at his side, the broken spear smashing into optics, his movements brutal and precise. The company poured in behind them, striking with savage coordination. The machines reeled under the ferocity, their formations breaking as they attempted to adapt. Marcus darted ahead, weaving through wreckage, shouting for the warriors to follow. Every step carried him closer to the Nexus, closer to the heart of the storm. Kale fought to keep pace, his chest burning, his limbs heavy, but he refused to let the human go alone. Then the ground split, and from the rift emerged the enemy's warlord. It towered above the battlefield, plated in dark alloy, arms ending in blades that pulsed with energy. Its voice rumbled across the field, metallic and cold, a declaration of inevitability. Marcus did not hesitate. He hurled his ruined rifle aside and drew his knife, meeting the giant head-on. The clash was savage. The warlord struck with inhuman speed, blades crashing down in arcs meant to cleave him in half. Marcus slipped between them, the knife slashing sparks across its joints. Each dodge was narrower than the last, each counterstrike born of desperation and fury. Kale tried to reach him, but waves of lesser machines pressed him back, their intent clear: they meant to isolate the human, to crush the symbol he had become. Marcus fought with reckless abandon. His armor shattered piece by piece, plates crumpling under blows that would have flattened stone. Blood streaked his face, but his eyes blazed, refusing to dim. He drove the knife into the warlord's chest, only for the blade to snap against its armor. With bare hands he seized a fallen shard of steel, wielding it like a crude spear, and plunged it into a gap he had carved. The warlord roared, staggering, but still it fought. Kale broke through at last, slashing a path to Marcus's side. Together they struck, one with the discipline of a commander, the other with the savagery of a survivor. Drosk joined them, his broken spear biting deep into the warlord's flank. Sparks and fire erupted as the giant reeled. Marcus climbed its frame like a beast, driving his makeshift weapon deeper, tearing cables free with his bare hands. With a final cry that was more defiance than triumph, Marcus ripped the core from its chest. The warlord collapsed, crashing into the earth with a thunder that silenced the field. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the machines faltered, their lights dimming, their ranks scattering in confusion. The Nexus stood exposed, vulnerable. Kale seized the moment. Strike now. The company surged forward, their blades cutting through the last defenders. Explosives planted at the Nexus detonated in a blaze of white fire, the monolith shattering into fragments. The invasion's brain was no more. When the smoke cleared, the battlefield lay silent. The machines fled in disarray, their unity broken. Kale turned to find Marcus on his knees, blood soaking his armor, his hands blackened from torn circuitry. Yet he was alive, chest heaving, eyes still alight. Kale knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You have given us more than survival. You have given us victory." Drosk stood over them, silent for a moment, then lowered the broken spear in a warrior's salute. "You are no outsider, human. You are kin." Marcus managed a grin, weary but fierce. "Kin, huh? I can live with that." His gaze drifted across the battlefield, where alien warriors raised their weapons in exhausted triumph. "Guess I found another war worth fighting." Kale rose, lifting his glaive high. The company roared, their voices echoing across the ruins, not as the dirge of the dying but as the cry of the victorious. For the first time in countless battles, Kale believed the tide had turned. They had struck down the unbreakable, and at their side stood a human who refused to fall. The smoke rolled across the horizon, hiding whatever battles lay ahead, but in Kale's heart the path was clear. With Marcus among them, they no longer carried despair. They carried fire.